Welcome to today's show called Inside the Bible, produced here at Andrews University. I'm joined today, as always, by my friends Felicia Daddis and Andrew Abbott.
And you know that I am excited to hear from you. So go on our Facebook page, facebook.com/InsideTheBible. Share with us what you've been learning, your questions, your comments, but don't do it all by yourself. Invite your family and your friends to be a part of it. We want to hear from all of you.
We all experience disappointment from time to time, but repeating the experience just doesn't take away any of the bitterness or discouragement. And it becomes especially tough when there is betrayal mixed in as well. And we're going to explore these feelings as well as fear, failure, and revenge in this episode. Today, we move from the story of Abraham to the story of his grandson, Jacob.
As you open the Bible, you no doubt have noticed that Jacob had two names. At a certain point in his life, Jacob was given his nation name of Israel. This name is popular because most of us know a country with this name. But before Israel became a nation, and even before Jacob was given this name, he needed to face one of his biggest rivals. It is the same rival we all have, ourselves.
Well, I don't know who you turn to when you're in trouble, but if you're ready to face yourself, then this investigation is definitely for you. It starts right now. Have you ever had to run away from your problems?
I've tried.
You've tried. How did that work out for you?
Not too well.
When I was younger, I never really had like a father figure around, and I always blamed God for it. And then around the time everyone was getting older and they were learning new things from their parents, I never really had that. And I always blamed God, and because of that, I ran from him, even though I probably should have run to him in those circumstances. But, you know, you live and you learn.
Right.
Yeah.
The sinking feeling of the submarine descending couldn't keep pace with the heartbeat of the 17-year-old girl as she crouched in the small space. The vessel had just left the port of Baltimore after it had stopped for a short stay, and Barbara knew the next location would be England. She desperately wanted to go there and get a taste for what being abroad was like. And so, while no one was looking, she had stowed away on a Navy submarine. But it didn't take long for her to become seasick, and there was even carbon monoxide blowing into the chamber as well. Dizzy and disoriented, she stood up and announced herself to the sailors. Luckily, they were able to turn back and take her back to her parents before the situation got more serious. Think of how this relates to the story of another young man who ran away from his parents. Jacob was in dire straits because he knew that his brother Esau was on his tail, and he was running for his life away from everything that was familiar to him. And as we dive into this story here in our episode today, we'll gather insights and figure out exactly how this runaway story ends up for our friend Jacob.
I'm back in the museum here at Andrews University by the Nathan Green paintings, where now we're talking about the time of Isaac when he had the birthright, was going to give it to his son Esau. But instead, Jacob tricked him by putting goat skins on his arms, as the painting shows. This story would have happened at the very early parts of the Middle Bronze Age. Middle Bronze Age time was a much better pottery is found. As you can see in this example, wheel made, very perfect edges, much different from that early Bronze Age pottery that was handcrafted. In the story, Isaac wants to give a birthright blessing to his son, the eldest son, a kind of way to pass on the leadership of the family. Well, this actually had two parts to it. It had the birthright aspect, the double inheritance portion, that would leave the eldest brother with an extra amount, and the blessing part, the birthright blessing, which was an actual blessing that the father would give to the eldest son to bless him and then pass along in that way a spiritual leadership role for the family. It seems in the story that Jacob was much more interested in this birthright blessing, as that's what he purchased from Esau for a bowl of lentils. Esau, it seems, didn't care much about that. Esau, however, did seem to care a lot about the inheritance, the wealth. Jacob, it seems, appears to have understood that when the brothers came together again, Jacob sent that extra portion ahead of him to give back to his brother Esau as a way of saying sorry.
One of the most important aspects in the life of the biblical character that we know as Jacob, it is the transformation that we see in his life along with his story. Now, his story begins with deceit, with lies, with trickery, with cleverness, knowing that even his mother and his brother and his father, they all mixed into a very unhealthy family relationship, to the point that they lied to each other, they trick each other. And Jacob copies that, and his story starts by him being classified as a liar, a deceitful person. He deceived his father, he deceived his brother. And then he goes, and in his journey, as he's trying to escape the fury of his brother, then he encounters God. He has a dream in which he sees the stairs going to heaven, and then there he sees the angels, or really the messengers. The Bible doesn't necessarily say angels, but the messengers coming down to assist him and to be with him.
Wow, this is like the home of God. This is the house of God, and I feel comfortable here.
He was a perpetrator before, but now he becomes a victim. And as he becomes a victim, his character suddenly starts to change.
Have you ever made a terrible mistake or just made a really bad decision and you feel absolutely terrible, humiliated and ashamed, and you don't want anyone else to find out about it? I've been through that before. Just made a terrible mistake, a terrible decision, and felt so far away from God and wanting no one else to find out about it. But what is amazing is that is when God shows himself in such a marvelous way and reassures me, Felicia, my arms are still open to you and I still love you. Jacob, one of my favorite characters in the Bible, as a matter of fact, experienced the very same thing. Made a really bad decision and tried to run away from it, went on his own journey. And then God shows up in a marvelous way. Let's find out what happened.
Jacob, we know he's running from his brother. There's a lot of history that's involved there. But I really want to focus on his first encounter with God at night. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, wow. Talk about guilt and remorse. I mean, it seemed like he was on the track towards something great. I mean, he had the birthright within his grasp almost, in his view anyway. And then he just blows it with that one event in his life. And, it's probably impulse. His mom comes running to him, "This is your chance." And he's like, "Oh, okay, I got to do this." And then suddenly, out of that one impulsive moment, his life is ruined. I mean, can you imagine? That just must have been the darkest moment.
And what's interesting is that probably under the impression that his mother would have been giving him is his actions, which we now know were not good actions, he would have felt and his mother would have felt were fulfilling God's prophecy and God's plan based on the prophecy given at his birth.
Right. Yeah.
So this is like a total world shift for him.
And I think it's kind of hard sometimes when you know like God has this thing for you, but you don't see it happening. I mean, when you think about it, like Esau was definitely supposed to get the birthright. There was no question. So if God is telling him, "Oh yeah, you're going to get this great thing," how is that supposed to be fulfilled? And you see like with his mom and how they go about doing it, it's a very dishonest this thing. And man, to know that it's like your fault that something goes wrong, especially when it comes to God, I feel terrible. Like, that's the worst feeling in the world.
And again, and this is most likely, I mean, the first recorded, interaction of Jacob directly with God. Before this, he's going off the faith of his parents and the stories. So this is, him meeting God in many ways.
Yeah, I wonder what his conception of God was before this happened. I mean, did he think of him as tyrannical? Did he think of him as being this tyrant who's just looking down, scrutinizing every little detail of his life?
Or someone who would tell you to steal a birthright.
Yeah, or someone like that. Yeah. Come on, man up. Nose your way in there. And then here he has this experience where, wow, this is the God I can serve. Who really cares about me, who is full of grace. That must have been an amazing moment for him.
Well, yeah, I mean, he turned the rock that he had under his head up as sort of an altar. So I mean, he's designating this as almost a temple of God in some ways.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I think looking at home too, home is a safe space, and for God to come and give him this vision, and for it to be something where God doesn't condemn him or doesn't throw stones at him, but gives him a vision of what the good things that God is going to do for his life. I'm sure he felt safe. I'm sure he felt at home. And for him to be at a place where God has spoke to him, I'm sure he thought of it, wow, this is like the home of God. This is the house of God. And I feel comfortable here. And I want other people to know that I feel comfortable with this God, with this man, well, that's man, but this God that has come to me and has comforted me and shown me the great things that are going to happen, regardless of what it is that I've done.
Most of the ancient people, they believed that the deities live in the high places. That's why they built huge temples, some of them called ziggurats, with huge staircases built out of stone so you can reach the highest possible level so you can be the closest possible to God. But in Jacob's dream is the opposite. It is not Jacob going up, it is God's messengers coming down, which takes a different tune to the story. And that's why Jacob calls that place Bethel or Bethel, which is formed of two Hebrew words, Beit as house and El as a short abbreviation of the word Elohim. So that's the word Bethel, house of God. Because Jacob at the beginning believed that this place, this physical place, was where God actually dwells. And God promised him, I'm going to take you on a journey, and then I'm going to bring you back, and I'm going to give this place to your descendants. So Jacob takes that promise to the heart, and then he begins his journey. In his journey, he becomes the victim of the same manipulation and trickery that he before was perpetrating. So he was a perpetrator before, but now he becomes a victim. And as he becomes a victim, his character suddenly starts to change. And now he's actually showing honesty to his father-in-law, Laban, even though his father-in-law, throughout the entire story, he's been just playing tricks and tricks on him, being dishonest, lying to him, deceiving him. Yet he becomes honest. And then he comes back from that journey as a changed man. Now, no longer is Jacob the liar. Now he tries to send gift to his brother to appease him, like a former apology, and say, I acknowledge that I was wrong.
You remember the story where Jacob takes his two wives, Leah and Rachel, and they flee their father-in-law Laban, and in the process of going, Laban follows them, and because he says his household gods were stolen. The Bible is very clear that Rachel actually was the one who took those gods. Although all the things that God had blessed them with over these years, the large flocks and everything, it seems like the family still had trouble trusting God. Well, in archaeology, we've actually come across gods similar to the ones perhaps that she would have taken. Small, portable, fertility gods, and they're kind of ugly. The archaeologists have found one. They have one on display here in the Archaeology Museum, right below the picture of Rachel taking them and putting them into her bag. Something that she would have hidden in the saddle and been small enough that she could have sat on. The ancient people at a time in northern Syria and Mesopotamia, they believed that these small gods, they gave some kind of potent power that would allow them to be fertile. Well, we know that this wasn't the case for Rachel, as she only ended up having 2 sons. Leah, however, isn't mentioned as having stolen any gods, and she had quite a few sons. Perhaps it'd be better if Rachel would have spent more time trusting in God.
Have you ever wrestled with God?
I would say I'm wrestling with God right now.
He was a follower of God, but this is where he goes to becoming a patriarch.
Once you come to the face of God, there's no other outcome possible.
Have you ever had to fight with God, and why did you?
Yes, I have. I thought that my life was perfect at the time, and when he told me that we needed to go somewhere else and it wasn't the plans that I thought were great, I had to wrestle with God. I'm like, no, God, I don't want to do that. But it ended up being the better choice.
Have you ever wrestled with God?
Yes.
Do you remember a particular experience where you fought with him?
I would say I'm wrestling with God right now, in the sense of, as I'm preparing to graduate, there was a time where I was praying for God, like, show me what you want me to do, show me what you want me to do. And he spoke, and what he said to me was, instead of asking me to show you where I want you to go, have you ask yourself, are you ready to receive what I have for you? And that just kind of shook me up and kind of made me step back and be like, okay, maybe a lot of the times when we're waiting on God to do something, he's actually waiting on us.
When Jacob woke up after that dream of angels on a ladder, anointed the rock that had been protecting his head while he slept with oil, and changed the name of the place from Luz to Bethel, he vowed to give God 1/10 of everything he earned as a way to say thank you for the protection and guidance God had promised him. He had been forgiven by God for the deceit against his father Isaac by stealing away Esau, his twin brother's blessing. I can only imagine the sense of confidence he must have felt that morning as he continued his journey north toward Padan Aram. What a difference a night with God had made in his life. Then, after finding his uncle Laban and falling in love with Rachel, he must have had such trust in God. But because people aren't robots, and each still retains a free will, Laban exercised this in tricking Jacob into marrying Rachel's older sister instead of her. Jacob certainly would have felt betrayal. But according to the text, he never lost confidence in God again. After 7 years, he had married both sisters, and eventually, over the next 13 years, even took their handmaids as concubines, producing a total of 11 sons, 1 daughter, and 1 more son on the way. After a total of 20 years since that Bethel experience of faithfulness to God and trust in him, Jacob had accumulated a large family and a large flock, and he now was a threat to Laban. Feeling the danger, he called his wives together and hatched a plan to escape. 3 days after they fled, Laban found out and chased him down. Rachel had stolen some idols, and Laban used that as an excuse to hunt his son-in-law. But after not finding them, due to Rachel's deceit, Laban and Jacob made peace at Mizpah, and Laban returned home. It wasn't long after that, though, that word reached him that his twin brother Esau and 400 armed men of war were on their way to intercept him. Jacob had a choice to make. Would he rely on God to sustain him? The Bible says that Jacob turned to God in prayer. Jacob recognized that it was God that had blessed him and given him 2 great companies, this family's servants and flock. And he asked for deliverance there at Penuel. He was met by a man at night, thinking it was an enemy. He wrestled with him desperately until the sun was about to rise. At this point, the man revealed himself to be God, and Jacob turned from struggling to clinging. It was at Penuel, the night before he met Esau, that his nation name of Israel was given, and Jacob's eternal and unwavering allegiance to God was sealed.
What about the second time he meets God? He meets God again at night, except it's not in a vision. It's, right there. He's wrestling with God. How does that affect you? I mean, what are some things that strike you as really interesting in that experience?
Wow, I'm sure just, the adrenaline at that point must have just been racing through his body. I wonder if it maybe brought kind of a flashback, so to speak, of him running from Esau. I mean, he's assuming Esau's out there. He knows he's coming to get him at some point. That's what he's thinking. And then suddenly he has this kind of confrontation. He's probably thinking, whoa, I'm reliving that sin that I committed back there, because it just brought back all the memories, I'm sure.
And who of us hasn't wrestled with God at some point? Maybe not physically so that we dislocated our hips, but I would hope.
Might feel like that a little bit.
We're wrestling all night, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, this is, I think in many ways this is the moment this is where Jacob gets his name changed to Israel. This is where he goes from, he was a follower of God, but this is where he goes to becoming a patriarch.
The journey of Jacob is marked by those two encounters, the one in Bethel, and now the new one as he's returning back to his brother in what is called Peniel. Now, in this case, it's different. Jacob does not really have a dream. He is getting dark, and then comes this character, this individual that starts to fight with Jacob. Jacob does not recognize who he is at first. So he might probably thought that he was either Esau himself trying to kill him, or somebody sent by Esau trying to kill him. So he's fighting for his life. And he's fighting to the almost dawn, almost to sunrise. Then this character who was wrestling with Jacob says, it's almost sunrise and you're still fighting. So he hurts Jacob just a little bit, enough so Jacob stops fighting, and then Jacob grabs to that being and says, I will not leave you until you bless me. Jacob is now so eager for the blessing of God. This time not using trickery, this time not using deceitfulness, this time just claiming, this time just asking, this time just crying out for God's blessings. Because now he's a changed being. And the fact that God changes Jacob's names at that precise moment is reflective of the change that God sees in Jacob. And he says, you're no longer Jacob the liar. Now your name is going to be Israel, or the father of many nations. That's what you're going to be now, because that's what Jacob needed. That journey that started with a covenant, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to bring you back. And then as he comes back, God says, you see, it worked. You're a changed man, and now changing your name. So Jacob named that place Peniel, which is towards to Peni, in the face of El, God. So once you come to the face of God, there's no other outcome possible but total transformation. And that's what Jacob experienced.
From the earliest of ages, in fact, while still unborn, Jacob reached for more than was usual when he grasped his brother's heel, who was just born before him. Preferring to learn life around the camp rather than in the field, Jacob grew up closer to his mother than his father, but he never stopped reaching. When Esau was hungry, he fed him in exchange for Esau's birthright. Then, when the time came to bestow the birthright blessing on Esau, Jacob again stepped in and took what wasn't his. This resulted in his losing everything, being forced to flee to remain alive. The cost was that he would never see his beloved mother again. But in the midst of this, God did not leave him, but rather visited him with an incredibly comforting image in a dream at Bethel. The lesson for us is obvious. No matter how badly you mess up in life, God has not left you.
Jacob's life following Bethel took some serious twists and turns. First, he fell in love, then found a steady job, then he was cheated into marrying the sister of his true love, and then he fell into a long haggling session with his extended family, and then finally, he was chased by an armed clan led by his own father-in-law. And then he was running away again. And God comes and encounters him in a physical battle. Fighting with God is something that you and I could experience in our lives as well. But the most important lesson we learn from Jacob's story is that we cannot finish the battle without receiving God's blessing.
That was really powerful. And I hope that you had an experience with God like I did on today's program. But don't keep it to yourself. Go on our Facebook page, facebook.com/InsideTheBible. Like our page and share your experience with us. Maybe you have a question that you want to ask. You can post that question as well. And also invite your family members and your friends to join in on the journey.
Overcoming failure is tough. Paying for the consequences is often the hardest part. It might seem that when we pray to God, all we hear is just silence. Why can't God speak to us like He did to Jacob? And what happened to Jacob and his descendants? Is there anything we can discover more if we dig just a little bit deeper? Join us next time in our search for answers as we go inside the Bible.
And Jacob's kind of like, well, I don't really care that you were saying your brothers would bow down to you. But you're saying now your parents are going to bow down to you? I don't think so.
When you're living up in the high life, and then all of a sudden you're, pushed down to cleaning toilets, there's a certain respect that you begin to have for those people.
Most of the people who interpret the story look through the lenses of modern Western world.
He could have taken, his power and used it against those that oppress him. And he was right. We will call that today justice.